Mixing with Mike mixing tip, creating and working with mix stems. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to start and lay out a mix and talk about creating stems. So I think there's a real misunderstanding of exactly what stems are and how to manage and how to deal with them. So I want to kind of lay this out for you and do a session here where we're going to just kind of lay out our stems. So I'm actually going to do a save as here. So this is part of the R&B mix. I'm just gonna call this stems, and so the printout of the stems, and this is kind of an important thing because I want you to understand like the kind of the power that's involved with this here. One of the things that couple things that you want to do. You want to be careful about managing your levels and the way that you kind of work with things. Because particularly with the mix bus. So in printing the final mix, I generally try to keep my mix bus output levels or my average level probably somewhere around like -10. And my average level is not going up much higher than like -6. I want to leave enough headroom there for the mix. But when we actually print out stems, and I want to kind of define stems and give you a little bit of a historical perspective so that you understand what it is. In the kind of going back, I guess, to when stem printing was sort of became a thing, we're probably going back to like the 1980s, more or less. And at that time, one of the things that was sort of required and used by a lot of movies were stems. They wanted stem printouts of mixes that were specifically for the movie. And what the stem printouts were is they were generally drums and percussion in a stereo mix with effects, instrumentation in a stereo mix with effects. That would be all the other musical instrumentation minus drums and percussion. Lead vocals with effects, stereo, and background vocals with effects, stereo. And the idea of printing out these stems would be that they would have the ability in the movie to use any and all of those elements. So they could use the a cappella vocal track, for example, or they could actually use just the instrumental minus the vocals. And they could mix those as bed music within other parts of the movie. And that may be kind of a lead-in. And this would give them some options in terms of what they would work with. Now, the idea there is that if they were to lay out all the stems side by side, you would essentially have the mix. Now, there's a couple of things that caveats with this, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about that. So one is that I have here sort of a bounce out, that lays out the beginning and the end of the song. So I kind of want to map out here for a second where the actual end of the music is. So I actually have an end marker here that I'm using. And so I want to make sure that I'm tied right into that. So there's no sound that appears after that. I'm actually going to extend it out because there may be some reverb here. Now, what you notice is that I have a master fade. And what I've done is I've highlighted everything from the beginning of the session. And the first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to turn the automation off. So I'm actually going to leave the master fade out, and I'm going to take out or bypass my mix bus processing. Now, the way that I lay out the mix here and start to lay out the stems, because this is where working with what I call the 3-tier mix structure, where I'm kind of putting together instruments into groupings. So you see here I have drums, guitar, keys, lead vocal, and background vocals. So what I am going to do is I'm actually going to print out a mix that has, because I have everything including effects laid out and fed into these stems. So like on my bass and drums, I actually mix the bass in with the drums. And I actually check to see what would happen if I move this into the guitar or key stem, and it doesn't sound nearly as good. So I have it kind of pumping and moving with the drums. I'm actually going to leave it in there. Everything, including the effects returns, which are these gray channels, are all going into bus 1, 2. These are the percussion tracks here. And those all feed into the stem. So when I lay this out and I mute these other tracks, I now have a complete mix of the drums and percussion with the bass. And this I had muted, right? So any other automation appears, and so nothing else bounces down. And now normally what I would do is I would bounce this out and let this go. So the reason why I don't have any master fader automation, I'm going to explain in a second. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do a bounce out here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it offline. And what we're going to do is we're going to start, well, okay, I'll actually kind of kill the title here for a second. And what I'm going to do is this is going to be my drum, or let me just see, FYA, which would be Find You Again. That would be the title, and this is going to be our drum stem. So when I print this out, I'm going to keep it at the same sample rate, bit depth, interleaved, all that sort of stuff. And one thing I want to do here is I'm going to import it right after the bounce. And this is part of the reason why I'm bouncing it right from bar one, beat one. So I'm going to do it offline, so this will happen faster. And then you'll kind of see how this sort of lays out here. So what happens is that as I bounce this and as I bounce out each of the stems, I'm actually going to bring them into an audio track, and I'm going to run it. So the idea then is from these individual stems, I can actually recreate a lot of things. One, I can completely redo my mix bus processing. I could also feed this directly to the mastering engineer. So if there was a problem with the original mix, sometimes mastering engineers will do a stem master, which means that they actually take the original stems minus mix bus automation and mix bus fader, and they basically can recombine them, process them individually on the stem level, and then lay this out right back in to a stereo file, and then master it on the stereo end. So it gives them actual control of each of the individual stems. So if there's a problem on that end, you have some ability to adjust it. It makes it very easy, and it's taking a bit longer than I'd like it to take, but whatever it is, it's got to let it run its process here. The other thing is that as we go through the individual mixes, if I need to recreate something, or let's just say that the vocalist decides they want to retrack all of the vocals for whatever reason, or maybe we need to create a performance mix where they actually go and they do like a live performance. This would be what would be called like a TV track. So in printing versions, it's not uncommon to actually go through and print mix, which is a mix minus vocals. That's called a TV track. So the idea is it would have all the background vocals with effects minus the lead vocals. So this way, if they called it a TV mix because if the artist, say, went on a talk show where they were going to kind of promote their album, what would end up happening is they may go and do a performance, but without the band, or maybe the production is such that having a band isn't sort of, appropriate for that style. So they would go up and they would sing, and there would be a music background track. Now, it would not have typically the fade out, and that would be left because sometimes that sounds weird. Like if you have a fade out in a TV mix, and then the person has to start singing lower and lower as they get through the end of the song, and it even looks weirder if the broadcast engineer is actually fading them out along with the music, and then they're just sort of up on stage. It's just like, and that would only go out for the broadcast feed, not for the people in the audience. So you would kind of have the music running out, and you'd kind of map out. Sometimes you would actually have an ending. So like if there was a fade out thing, that would actually end up being kind of weird. So all right, so this is bounced out now, and now what I have here is I can now put this on a new track, and so now I essentially have this is my stereo drum mix. Exactly as I've laid everything out with all of the processing. And this gives me the ability to kind of lay this out. So the next thing I'm going to do is I could actually bounce the guitars and keys separately, but I'm actually going to kind of bounce these out together here. So let me just do the right shortcut here. And this is going to be my instrumental stem. So now I kept the bass in with those just because of the sound thing, although, that would be, I have a thing about this where with bass, quite often, because the low end works so much better with the kick drum, quite often, like the bass, if it's tied with the kick drum, I want them to kind of compress in the stem and kind of work together. Sometimes a bass will kind of play or work a little bit more with the guitar tracks, in which case I would put it in with the instrumental stuff. So technically, the bass is typically separated and put with the other instruments. Here, I'm going to keep it with the drums and percussion, and and let people kind of sit with that for whatever it is. Now, the idea of this and the idea of not having the master fade out and not doing the mix bus processing is that I can now sort of lay out my mix, these 3 stereo or 4 stereo tracks that I'm going to lay out, and that would be my mix minus my master mix bus processing. No fade. So I can now recreate the fade, change the fade, do an edit that eliminates the fade entirely, and it gives me all of the options that I could possibly do and recreate. And if I bounce it right back into the same mix session, I can essentially deactivate all the tracks that I'm not using, and essentially I have my whole mix. So there's a lot of options with this. In certain styles of music, the exact same productions may be used for having multiple or different artists perform on it. So you can actually have a finished mix and have 5 or 6 different people actually sing completely different songs or over it. And then it gets released. So in certain styles of music, like in reggae and a lot of dance music and stuff like that, that's not an uncommon thing. And it's actually a way of kind of getting like a certain vibe, so producers will do, getting it, making it more marketable and spreading by 5 times the work that you've done on a single mix, or 6 times the work that you've done on a single mix. So there's a lot of other options that kind of stem out or go along with this. So this bounce is taking way longer than what I expected, probably because of all the other processing that's going on. But it does allow me to kind of talk or speak to exactly what's going on here. So let's just kind of lay this out here for a second. And maybe what we'll do is we'll just kind of do a listen, and we'll kind of leave the lead vocals and leave that a cappella stuff. So separate. Now, when you get to the a cappella stuff, it's very important that your edits on the individual tracks are very clean, about as clean as you can get. You really need to go through your tracks with a fine-tooth comb, remove noises, little things in between, clean up, not get rid of the breaths, but clean up the breaths so that they actually sound natural, and clear up as many of those things as you possibly can, because what'll end up happening is, as you start to to go through everything. So let's just kind of preview this for a second, just so we can hear it. So now this would be, if I mute this out, this would be our exact mix. And then if I actually put the automation back on here on the master fader track, and now I have my master fader, I have the identical mix as I would if I put these in here. Minus gain. Ooh, okay. All right, so something came in here. Hold on one second here. Let me just see if there was, oh, you know what? There may be a gain differential with the, wow. Okay, that's weird. That's another technical issue I completely did not expect, because I did bounce out those with that level of processing. But let's just kind of take a look at that. Wow, that's very interesting. That was completely unexpected here. That's why, part of why leaving out the master stem processing. Let's just kind of compare levels here and see what technically went wrong. That's kind of really, that looks identical. Oh, no, that's right. Yeah. So in theory, I guess, if we wanted to get technical about it, and let's just see how exacting Pro Tools is in a bounce. So this should phase out entirely, which it doesn't. I love it. Yes. Perfect. Although the drums completely cancel. So I think what's going on here, it's actually there's a randomness to the Dimension D processing, the chorusing. Right. All right, so let's just see why there's a difference in here. Nope, that's identical. So that's the same. All right. And oh, I see what happened. Okay, so when I did that bounce, I must have messed that up and left the original drums in. Oh, you know what I did? I left the stem open. That's exactly what it was. So it bounced out. That's why you listen to it when you go down. Okay, so that's where I screwed up. All right, so at least I know that I screwed up and there's nothing really wrong with the process here. Anyway, there's a there's a quick thing. Why you listen to your mixes after you're done. That's lesson A right from there. But as you bounce this out, and it's so I sort of screwed this up here, but let's just kind of do this now. Once I have this laid out exactly the way that I want to, it gives me the ability to kind of make different variations or versions of the mixes, and that's the basic idea. And then redo the mix bus processing, redo the fade out, and kind of go back and make it all happen. So wow, that's screwball. See, that's what happens when you talk. You know, like you get people who just like are always talking while they're working instead of paying attention to what they're doing. But maybe that's the purpose of the class. All right. Anyway, all screw ups aside, there's a little bit of information on creating and working with mix stems and all of the different ways it can help. One other quick thing we just want to add on here, because some people actually talk about stems and track stems and bouncing that out. And I'm going to make that another tip and talk about that, because that is a question that comes out a lot. And especially where you end up mixing somebody else's work and you ask them to print out the individual tracks, and talking about the best way to do that, because there's a lot of questions about whether you keep the processing that was there, take it away, and how you manage those types of things. That'll be the next tip. All right, mixing with my mixing tip, creating and working with mix stems.